At 8:15 in the morning on August 6th, 1945, the city of Hiroshima was waking up to an ordinary summer day. Streetcars rattled along their tracks. Children walked toward school carrying lunchboxes. Shopkeepers slid open wooden doors. Housewives swept dust from narrow streets. Then the sky flashed. A light brighter than the sun exploded over the city. For a brief moment, shadows burned into walls. People disappeared. The heat was hotter than the surface of the sun. A firestorm swallowed streets, bridges, rivers, and human lives in seconds. Those who survived would later say the sun had risen twice that morning. But the explosion over Hiroshima did not begin that day. It had begun decades earlier, inside the minds of scientists who were chasing a mystery hidden in the heart of the atom. At first, they believed they were unlocking the secrets of the universe. They did not yet realize they were opening the door to the most destructive weapon ever created. A weapon capable of ending cities, a weapon capable of ending civilization. But how did humanity reach the moment when a single bomb could erase an entire city? Who built it? Why was it used? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, once the atomic genie was released, could it ever be put back into the bottle? To answer that, we must go back to a quiet scientific revolution in Europe, long before the world even imagined nuclear war. At the dawn of the 20th century, the atom was believed to be the smallest building block of the universe. Indivisible, solid, eternal. But that belief was beginning to crack. In laboratories across Europe, scientists were discovering something extraordinary. Atoms were not solid at all. They were tiny worlds of energy. In 1896, French physicist Henri Becquerel discovered that uranium emitted mysterious rays that passed through solid objects. Soon after, Marie Curie and Pierre Curie revealed a new phenomenon: radioactivity. Atoms were not stable. They were constantly releasing energy, more energy than anyone had ever imagined possible. Later, Ernest Rutherford conducted experiments that shattered the old model of the atom entirely. By firing particles at thin sheets of gold, Rutherford discovered that atoms were mostly empty space. At their center sat a tiny, incredibly dense nucleus. It was here, inside that tiny nucleus, that unimaginable energy was locked away. For years, these discoveries remained purely academic. Scientists were curious. Governments barely noticed. The idea that atomic energy could ever become a weapon seemed absurd. Even Albert Einstein, whose famous equation, E=mc², revealed that mass could be converted into energy, did not imagine that anyone would build a bomb from it. The equation was beautiful, but it seemed impractical. After all, how could anyone possibly release the energy inside an atom? For decades, no one knew the answer. Then, in 1938, a discovery made in Nazi Germany would change everything. A discovery so shocking that it terrified the scientists who made it, because suddenly the impossible had become possible. The atom could be split. In the winter of 1938, a German chemist named Otto Hahn was performing a series of strange experiments in Berlin. He and his colleague Fritz Strassmann were bombarding uranium atoms with neutrons. They expected to create slightly heavier elements. Instead, something astonishing happened. The uranium atoms split apart. The fragments were elements much lighter than uranium. It was as if the atom had shattered. At first, Hahn could hardly believe the results. The explanation came from his former collaborator Lise Meitner, who had fled Nazi Germany because she was Jewish. While living in exile in Sweden, Meitner realized what had happened. The uranium nucleus had undergone nuclear fission. When the atom split, it released enormous energy. Even more terrifying, each fission reaction released additional neutrons. Those neutrons could split other atoms, which could split even more atoms. In theory, the process could become a chain reaction, a rapidly expanding cascade of atomic explosions. For the first time in history, scientists realized that a bomb of unimaginable power might be possible, and the discovery had happened inside Nazi Germany. The timing could not have been worse. In 1939, Europe was already sliding toward war. Adolf Hitler had begun expanding the German Reich, Austria had fallen, Czechoslovakia had been dismantled, and Jewish scientists were fleeing Germany in large numbers. Many of them carried terrifying knowledge with them, knowledge that could change the outcome of the coming war. Among them were some of the greatest scientific minds of the century. And soon, they would take their fears to the President of the United States, because they believed something unimaginable might happen. What if Nazi Germany built the atomic bomb first? In the summer of 1939, a group of refugee scientists gathered in the United States. They were deeply worried. One of them, Hungarian physicist Leo Szilard, understood the implications of nuclear chain reactions better than almost anyone. Years earlier, Szilard had imagined the concept of a self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction while crossing a street in London. Now that theoretical idea was becoming real, and Germany had already banned the export of uranium from Czechoslovakia. That fact alone terrified the scientists. It suggested the Nazis might already be working on an atomic weapon. Szilard knew he needed someone powerful enough to get the attention of the American government. Someone famous. Someone the president would listen to. So he turned to the most famous scientist in the world, Albert Einstein. Einstein was living quietly in the United States after fleeing Nazi Germany. He was a pacifist who hated war, but the possibility of a Nazi atomic bomb alarmed him deeply. In August 1939, Einstein signed a letter addressed to Franklin D. Roosevelt. The letter warned that Germany might be attempting to build extremely powerful bombs based on nuclear chain reactions. Bombs capable of destroying entire ports, perhaps entire cities. Roosevelt took the warning seriously. Within months, the United States government began quietly funding research into atomic energy. At first, the program was small, but then the world changed. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. The invasion triggered World War II, and suddenly the race to build the most powerful weapon in history had begun. But at this stage, no one yet understood just how massive the project would become, nor how many people would eventually be drawn into its secret world. Soon, thousands of scientists, engineers, soldiers, and workers would be brought together in one of the most ambitious scientific projects ever attempted. It would be known as the Manhattan Project, and its success would forever change the fate of humanity. But first, the scientists had to answer a terrifying question. Could the power of the atom actually be controlled? Or would it destroy them before they ever built the bomb? By 1942, the United States government had made a decision that would transform the course of history. If an atomic bomb was possible, they had to build it first. The project would be unlike anything the world had ever seen. It would require enormous factories, cutting-edge physics, rare materials, and the brightest scientific minds on Earth. Most importantly, it had to remain completely secret. The program was placed under the leadership of Leslie Groves, a hard-driving U.S. Army engineer known for completing massive construction projects under impossible deadlines. Groves understood that time was everything. If Nazi Germany built the bomb first, the war could end in catastrophe. To lead the scientific effort, Groves chose a brilliant but unconventional physicist named J. Robert Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer was an unusual choice. He had never managed a large laboratory. He was quiet, intense, and deeply philosophical. But he possessed something rare: the ability to understand nearly every branch of physics involved in the bomb. Even more important, other scientists respected him. Soon, one of the most extraordinary scientific communities in history began to assemble. The government built entire secret cities. In the remote mountains of New Mexico, a laboratory rose from the desert. This place would become the heart of the atomic project. It was called Los Alamos Laboratory. Across the country, massive industrial facilities appeared almost overnight. In Oak Ridge, giant machines worked day and night to separate uranium isotopes. In Hanford, enormous nuclear reactors were built to manufacture a new element, plutonium. Most Americans had no idea these places even existed. Workers were told only small pieces of the truth. Some did not know what they were building until after the war ended. Yet within these secret cities, a race against time was underway. Scientists worked 12-hour days. Equations filled chalkboards. Explosives were tested in the desert. They were trying to turn theory into a weapon, but the physics was far more complicated than anyone expected. To build the bomb, they first needed to create the rare materials that made it possible. And producing those materials would become one of the greatest engineering challenges of the 20th century. The first problem was uranium. Natural uranium contains two main forms, uranium-238 and uranium-235. Only one of them could sustain a nuclear chain reaction. Uranium-235. But there was a problem. It made up less than 1% of natural uranium. Separating it was like trying to separate grains of sand that looked identical. To solve this problem, engineers built machines of staggering complexity. At Oak Ridge, enormous facilities used electromagnetic separation, gas diffusion, and thermal processes to isolate the precious uranium-235. Miles of pipes, giant magnets, and thousands of workers labored around the clock. The scale of the operation was astonishing. Entire valleys were filled with industrial equipment. Meanwhile, another path to the bomb was emerging. Scientists discovered that nuclear reactors could produce a completely new element: plutonium. This element did not exist naturally on Earth in large quantities, but inside nuclear reactors, uranium atoms could transform into plutonium through neutron absorption. And plutonium was even better for bombs. At the Hanford site in Washington state, giant reactors were built along the Columbia River. Cooling water flowed through miles of pipes. Inside the reactors, uranium fuel slowly transformed into plutonium. It was the birth of the nuclear industry. But producing bomb material was only half the challenge. The real question remained: how could they make it explode? Scientists knew that if enough uranium-235 or plutonium were brought together quickly, a chain reaction would begin. But the timing had to be perfect. Too slow, and the reaction would fizzle. Too fast, and the bomb might destroy itself before reaching full power. The engineers began designing two different bomb concepts. One was relatively simple. The other was incredibly complex. And it would push physics to its absolute limits. The first bomb design was based on uranium. Scientists realized that if two pieces of uranium-235 were fired together like bullets inside a tube, they would form a critical mass. The chain reaction would begin instantly. This design became known as the gun-type bomb. It was simple enough that scientists were confident it would work without testing. The second design was far more difficult. Plutonium behaved differently from uranium. If scientists tried to use the gun method, the plutonium would explode prematurely. The bomb would fail. Instead, they needed a new idea: implosion. The concept was radical. A sphere of plutonium would be surrounded by carefully shaped explosive charges. When detonated, the explosives would compress the plutonium inward with perfect symmetry. The compression would trigger the chain reaction. But the timing had to be precise down to millionths of a second. Even a tiny imbalance could ruin the bomb. To solve this, mathematicians, engineers, and physicists worked together on one of the most complicated engineering challenges ever attempted. Among them were brilliant figures like Richard Feynman and Enrico Fermi. The scientists lived in an unusual world. They played music, held parties, and debated philosophy at night. During the day, they designed weapons capable of destroying entire cities. Some were proud of their work. Others were deeply troubled. They understood what they were building, but they also believed the war demanded it. Meanwhile, across the world, Adolf Hitler still controlled much of Europe, and the war was entering its deadliest phase. The scientists pushed forward. Months turned into years. Finally, by the summer of 1945, the first atomic bomb was ready for testing. But no one knew exactly what would happen when it exploded. Some scientists even feared it might ignite the Earth's atmosphere. Others worried it might fail completely. There was only one way to find out. In the deserts of New Mexico, preparations began for the most important experiment in human history. Before dawn on July 16, 1945, a small group of scientists and soldiers gathered in the desert of New Mexico. They were about to witness something no human had ever seen before. The test site was called Trinity Nuclear Test. At the top of a tall steel tower sat a plutonium bomb nicknamed the Gadget. Lightning storms rolled across the desert that night. Rain fell. Some worried the test might be delayed. But just before sunrise, the sky began to clear. At 5:29 in the morning, the countdown reached 0. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the desert exploded with light. A fireball brighter than the sun expanded into the sky. Sand melted into green glass. A shockwave rolled across the desert. The mushroom cloud climbed higher and higher, over 12 kilometers into the atmosphere. Some observers fell silent, others cheered. Many simply stared in disbelief. The power released by the explosion was equal to roughly 20,000 tons of TNT. Humanity had just unlocked the energy of the atom. Oppenheimer later remembered a line from ancient Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. He whispered to himself, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The atomic bomb worked, and at that very moment, the leaders of the Allied powers were meeting in Europe. The war in the Pacific was still raging. Japan had not surrendered. The question now facing the United States government was no longer whether the bomb could be built. The question was far more troubling. Should it be used? And if so, against whom? The answer to that question would soon change the world forever. By the summer of 1945, the war in Europe had already ended. On May 8th, Germany surrendered to the Allied forces. The long nightmare of World War II in Europe was finally over. But across the Pacific Ocean, the war against Japan continued with brutal intensity. Japanese cities had already suffered devastating firebombing raids. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to ashes, yet Japan's military government refused to surrender. American planners feared that invading the Japanese mainland could cost hundreds of thousands of lives, both American and Japanese. In Washington, a new president faced one of the most difficult decisions in history. Just months earlier, Franklin D. Roosevelt had died suddenly. His successor, Harry S. Truman, now carried the responsibility of ending the war. When Truman first learned about the atomic bomb, he was stunned by its power. The weapon developed under the Manhattan Project had proven successful in the Trinity test. Now, the question was how to use it. Some scientists argued for a demonstration, detonating the bomb on an empty island to force Japan to surrender. Others feared that if the demonstration failed, the psychological impact would be lost. Military leaders believed the bomb could end the war quickly. A committee studied possible targets. They wanted cities that had not yet been heavily bombed, so the weapon's destructive power would be clearly visible. Several names appeared on the list: Kyoto, Yokohama, Kokura, Hiroshima. Each represented thousands of lives. Behind closed doors, the decision moved closer. The war had already killed tens of millions of people. Now, humanity stood on the edge of something new. A weapon capable of destroying a city in a single moment. But what would happen after that moment? No one truly knew. On the night of August 5th, 1945, an American bomber lifted off from a remote island airfield. The aircraft was a Boeing B-29 Superfortress named Enola Gay. Its pilot was Paul Tibbets. Inside the bomb bay was a weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen. A uranium bomb nicknamed Little Boy. The plane flew toward Japan through the quiet darkness of early morning. Below them, the city of Hiroshima was just beginning to wake. The city had been spared from major bombing raids so far. Its streets, bridges, and factories remained largely intact. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb was released. It fell silently for 43 seconds. Then it detonated nearly 600 meters above the city. A blinding flash filled the sky. The temperature at the center of the explosion reached several million degrees. Buildings vanished instantly. People standing near the blast were vaporized. A massive shockwave raced through the city, collapsing structures and shattering glass miles away. Within seconds, fires erupted everywhere. The city turned into a burning landscape of destruction. Approximately 70,000 people died almost instantly. Thousands more would die in the days and weeks that followed. Survivors wandered through the ruins, their skin burned and clothes torn away by the blast. Some walked silently like ghosts through streets that no longer existed. Others searched desperately for family members. None of them understood what had happened. Few had ever heard the word atomic, yet they had become the first victims of the nuclear age. But the war was not over, and 3 days later the world would witness a second atomic explosion. After Hiroshima, the Japanese government struggled to understand what had happened. Reports described a single bomb destroying an entire city. Many military leaders refused to believe it. Meanwhile, the United States prepared another atomic mission. This time, the weapon would be different. Instead of uranium, the bomb used plutonium, the same type tested during the Trinity explosion. On August 9, 1945, another B-29 bomber headed toward Japan. Its original target was Kokura, but heavy clouds obscured the city. After several unsuccessful passes, the crew turned toward their secondary target, the city of Nagasaki. At 11:02 a.m., the bomb, nicknamed Fat Man, exploded over the valley below. The geography of Nagasaki reduced the destruction slightly compared to Hiroshima. But the blast was still devastating. Factories, homes, and churches collapsed. Firestorms spread across the city. An estimated 40,000 people died instantly. By the end of the year, the death toll would rise dramatically due to burns and radiation sickness. For the first time in history, humanity had used nuclear weapons in war, and the consequences were impossible to ignore. Only days later, Japan made a decision that would bring the deadliest conflict in history to an end. On August 15, 1945, the voice of Emperor Hirohito was broadcast across Japan. For most citizens, it was the first time they had ever heard their emperor speak. His message was carefully worded. Japan would accept the terms of surrender. The devastation caused by the atomic bombs had become impossible to ignore. Soon afterward, the formal surrender ceremony took place aboard the battleship USS Missouri. World War II had finally ended. Across the globe, celebrations erupted. Soldiers returned home. Cities began rebuilding. But beneath the relief of peace lay a new and terrifying reality. The atomic bomb had changed warfare forever. No longer did victory require massive armies or long campaigns. A single weapon could destroy a city in seconds, and the knowledge of how to build that weapon could not be forgotten. Within a few years, other nations would begin building their own atomic bombs. A new kind of conflict was emerging, one not fought with tanks or trenches, but with weapons capable of ending civilization. The world was entering the Cold War, and the nuclear arms race was about to begin. In 1949, the Soviet Union successfully tested its first atomic weapon. The American monopoly on nuclear power had ended. Soon, both superpowers began building even more powerful weapons. Hydrogen bombs. These weapons used nuclear fusion rather than fission. Their explosive power was measured not in thousands of tons of TNT, but millions. Cities across the world began preparing for nuclear war. Children practiced duck and cover drills in schools. Governments built underground bunkers. Missiles capable of crossing continents were developed. The strategy that emerged was called mutually assured destruction. If one side launched nuclear weapons, the other would respond with equal or greater force. The result would be global annihilation. Paradoxically, the fear of total destruction may have prevented large-scale war between nuclear powers. Yet the danger has never disappeared. Today, thousands of nuclear warheads still exist around the world. enough to destroy civilization many times over. The atomic age did not end in 1945. It continues today. And it began with a question scientists once asked in quiet laboratories. What would happen if we unlocked the energy hidden inside the atom? Now humanity knows the answer. But the deeper question remains. Will we use that knowledge to destroy ourselves? Or to ensure that such weapons are never used again? Because the story of nuclear weapons is not just a story about science or war. It is a story about human choices. Choices that continue to shape the fate of the world. And somewhere in the silent ruins of Hiroshima, shadows still remain on stone walls. Reminders of the morning when the sun rose twice. And humanity entered the atomic age. The war ended in celebration. But the silence that followed was different from any peace humanity had known before. Cities across the world slowly returned to life. Soldiers came home. Families tried to rebuild what had been lost during the long years of World War II. Yet something fundamental had changed. For the first time in history, humanity possessed the power to destroy itself. The atomic bomb had not simply ended a war. It had opened a door that could never be closed again. In the ruins of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, survivors began rebuilding their shattered cities. Streets were cleared, homes were reconstructed. Children once again walked to school, but reminders of that August morning never disappeared. Shadows burned into stone walls. Twisted steel beams frozen in place. Stories passed down from those who had witnessed the blinding flash. The memory of the atomic bomb became part of human history. Yet even as the world mourned the destruction, another race had already begun. In 1949, the Soviet Union successfully detonated its own atomic weapon, ending the nuclear monopoly of the United States. The age of nuclear rivalry had begun. Soon, both sides began building larger arsenals. Not just dozens of bombs, but thousands. Weapons capable of destroying entire nations. The Cold War transformed the planet into a fragile balance of terror. Strategists called it mutually assured destruction. The idea was simple and terrifying. If one side launched nuclear weapons, the other would retaliate with equal force. Both civilizations would disappear. Paradoxically, the fear of total destruction may have prevented nuclear war between the world's superpowers, but the danger never truly vanished. Over the decades, nuclear technology continued to spread. New nations developed atomic arsenals. Missiles capable of crossing continents were built. Submarines began carrying nuclear weapons silently beneath the oceans. Humanity had created a weapon that could end civilization in minutes. Yet at the same time, the atomic age also brought unexpected possibilities. The same scientific discoveries that produced nuclear weapons also produced nuclear energy. Reactors began generating electricity for cities. Nuclear medicine helped doctors diagnose and treat diseases. The atom became both a symbol of destruction and a tool for progress. Two paths emerging from the same discovery. Even today, nearly 80 years after the first atomic explosion, thousands of nuclear warheads still exist around the world. Hidden in missile silos, stored aboard submarines, locked inside underground bunkers, waiting. The story of nuclear weapons is not just about physics or war or politics. It is a story about human choices, about the moment when science moved faster than wisdom, about the fragile balance between knowledge and responsibility. Because the power inside the atom did not create itself. Humans unlocked it, and the future of that power still rests in human hands. Somewhere in Hiroshima, visitors stand quietly beneath the preserved ruins of the atomic dome. They look at the sky above the city, the same sky that once flashed brighter than the sun, and they remember a simple truth that echoes through history. The atomic age did not begin with an explosion, it began with a question. What would happen if we split the atom? Now humanity knows the answer. The only question that remains is whether we are wise enough to live with it.